coming along. And we can get started. I'm going to mute myself and hand it over to you, Chris. Away you go.
Great, thanks a lot. Thanks for showing up, everybody, to my talk on enhancing non-native English-speaking teacher well-being in the shared domain. My name, as you can see there, is Chris White. I'm currently an associate professor for Oita University down here in Kyushu. It is a Sunday here, so I'm not in the office, but we'll see what we can do here. Now, this particular presentation is part of my ongoing research into well-being and training and motivation and self-efficacy that I'm doing on teachers here in Oita Prefecture. So there have been some real significant changes that have come down the line in the last little while. We're looking at changes to teaching materials, also to the improvement of training and recruitment of teachers. We can see that, in terms of teaching materials, Hi Friends, I think, was the original teaching material used for elementary school teachers. Now that's changed to Yes We Can. We're looking at the enhancement of specialized instruction. And so what that actually does is add to the teaching load of junior high school teachers as they are sort of farmed out to elementary schools to help elementary school teachers train for the teaching of English. And then the utilization of external human resources. So these are the ALT teachers. Currently, I believe there's about just under 20,000 ALT teachers currently working in Japan. Now that's up significantly from 2015, where there was only about 13,000 ALT teachers in Japan. So the numbers of these ALT teachers, especially on the JET program, have been increasing dramatically. And then the development of 1,000, what Monbuka Gakusho, or Ministry of Education, refers to as core leaders. And this was part of a joint program by the British Council and Monbuka Gakusho and the Ministry of Education, where teachers were selected throughout Japan. They were sent for training, and then they came back to their own regions to give small workshops over the period of 5 days to other teachers. And by doing this, the Ministry of Education hoped to reach all elementary school teachers within Japan. But since there are about 20,000 elementary schools in Japan, that's a pretty tall order and very, very difficult for them to accomplish just in one program. So there are some significant questions that we have in front of Tokyo 2020. So actually maybe Tokyo 2021 now, or perhaps even Tokyo 2022, who knows? But what about support for non-native English speaking teachers? What about work-life balance? What about well-being? Or do we just pile on all of these extra policy changes onto teachers and expect them to deal with all of it? So really, how can we increase the efficacy of all these reforms? How can we do it through training for these teachers? Can we achieve it through different kinds of practicums? What about the JET program? There's all sorts of things that we need to talk about here. So there are some real rapid changes that are occurring. Of course, grades 5 and 6 in elementary school have been given subject status. Grades 3, 4 now have moved to Gai Kokugo Katsudo. Still grades 1 and 2 are thinking about what they should be doing here in the future. And according to, I think, MEXT's YouTube channel, they have said that and yes, MEXT does have a YouTube channel, that's quite amazing. But they have said that they would like teachers to go ahead and try to use all means possible in order to improve their personal means of practice. The problem here is that teachers don't have a whole lot of time to do that. And they often see all of these new policy changes as simply a burden on them, right? So, what do we do in advance of this? Okay, now, one of the concepts that we're all familiar with, of course, is learner-centeredness. Of course, and rightfully so, we put the focus on the learner in the classroom because of all of these things that I've got written up here. It improves knowledge retention. It increases student independence. There's opportunities for kids to go out of the classroom and learn project-based learning, task-based learning. It helps them develop problem-solving skills. It really allows them to collaborate with their classmates. And hey, it's just a whole lot more fun, right? So if we focus on the learners, then hey, everything's okay, right? But unfortunately, it's not okay. It's wrong, right? There's actually a whole host of problems that we have. And we're going to start here with looking at this first one, and that is that Japanese non-native English speaking teachers have the longest working hours in the world by far. And so we're looking at here an average of 56 hours per week in Japan. Now that's as opposed to 38.3 hours, which is the OECD average. Now, we're also looking at the fact that teachers have double the administrative time than the OECD average. So they're doing a lot of extracurricular work. They have a lot of PTA obligations, a lot of things like that. And we can also see that the total monthly recommended overtime hours by Monbuka Gakusho. So about 60% of elementary school teachers are actually doing more than 80% of that monthly overtime. And 75% of junior high school teachers. So there's an incredible amount of overtime being done by these teachers. And that in the face of the fact that elementary school teachers themselves have the lowest overtime pay scale in the OECD currently, which is pretty shocking when you think about it. Now, I just want to talk a little bit about this overtime pay scale just for a moment. And what we see here is that Japanese teachers are actually exempt from modern labor laws, which basically dictate that overtime is paid on an hourly basis, right? So actually, Japanese teachers are subject to a law that came into effect in 1971, which dictates 4% of a teacher's base salary, regardless of the amount of hours that they work overtime. Now, can anybody guess what the average number of overtime hours was for a teacher in Japan in 1971? Can you guess what that is? Anybody want to take a quick guess? No? Don't want to? What do you think? Well, I'll tell you, it was actually just 2 hours of overtime a week. It was only 2. And now what we see currently is that actually about 50% of all teachers nowadays spend at least 20 hours of overtime per week on overtime right now. So even if teachers are capped at 45 hours a month, which is currently what Monbuka Gakusho, or the Ministry of Education, is proposing, that still equates to about 11 hours of overtime a week, which is 5 times the number it was in 1971. So that's quite a lot, right? And just as a side note here, the number of actual teaching contact hours in the classroom is fewer in Japan than the OECD average. So teachers are only teaching 18 hours a week, as opposed to 20.3 in the OECD. So we can just see that there's an awful lot of administrative duty that teachers are doing right now in Japan. And a lot of that is unpaid. I do actually have several colleagues who are putting in sometimes 80 hours a week of work, which is just unhealthy, really. Okay, so let's move on here, which brings up the topic of self-efficacy and self-esteem. Now, the difference between these two, you can see Bandura's definition right here. People's beliefs in their capabilities to kind of produce a desired effect by their own actions. So I can achieve this, I can do this, as opposed to self-esteem, which is more a belief in your own worth or your own value. I'm going to give you a couple numbers here. 30.6. This is actually the percentage of teachers in Japan who had confidence in their own ability to motivate students in the classroom. So, what do you think the international average of this was? Right? Yeah, it is. It is much higher. It is actually, boom, right there. It's 86.3%. Now I'm going to give you another interesting number here, 72%. This refers to the international average of teachers who believe that they can get their own students to believe in themselves. Okay, they can motivate those students to believe in themselves. What do you think the Japanese average was here? Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's much lower. So we see this right here, 24.1%. So almost 3 times lower than the international average. So does that mean that Japanese teachers are bad teachers? Of course it doesn't mean that, right? It doesn't mean that they're bad teachers, but it does mean that there are some significant challenges with respect to the self-efficacy and probably even the self-esteem of teachers in the classroom. So what's the big deal here? Well, if you look at Pajaris's definition here, self-efficacy really helps with the amount of effort that one gives to a task and how long one keeps up that effort. And then the resiliency that one gives in the face of those obstacles that teachers hit all the way along, as they're giving their lessons. So understandably, teachers with low levels of self-efficacy are going to be more pessimistic, right? They're going to be stressed out and they may even burn out. And these are the kind of things that we really want to avoid. Of course, we have lots of reasons for this. A lack of English language teacher training, a lack of practical second language linguistic skill, especially amongst elementary school teachers, increased administrative duties, as I told you, and the rapid pace of reforms. These are all reasons that this comes into play. Now, there is a model that Bandura came up with in 1986 called reciprocal determinism, and it kind of shows the interplay of an individual's behavior, their personal factors, and their environment. I've adapted that to sort of look at the Japanese context, and you can see where you have the shared classroom environment here, with the focus on the learner, of course, as it is right now. But what you can really see here is that in the classroom, the students and the teacher have a reciprocal relationship. So focusing only on the needs of the student at the expense of the teacher would, in the long run, really have an adverse effect on both parties, right? And this unbalanced focus basically results in a weak link in the student-teacher relationship. So you can kind of see how that is sort of pervading right here. And so self-efficacy and motivation and perseverance, right? And teacher behavior and personal factors, they're both influenced by student behavior and by teacher behavior, right? So if we just continue to focus on the student behavior, then we really see that this starts to decline overall in the classroom environment over time. And despite all of the financial investment and the industry-wide focus on the learner, we end up having the status quo, which is really a shame, right? So what are some of these reasons for burnout? I mentioned a few of them before, but we have, whoops, sorry about that. We have excessive workloads. Japan is a high context culture. I'm sure you're all aware of that. So the kuki o yomu, or the ability to read between the lines and know what's expected of you, is actually rather stressful in that kind of environment. Teachers in Japan have very little autonomy in the classroom, according to Fujita. and the greatest need for professional development, but they're not getting a lot of that, right? In addition to that, the lowest levels of reported job skills, self-efficacy in the OECD. And so these are all, reasons that we see teachers, burning out in the classroom. Interestingly, right, when we talk about Pro-D, we see that teachers actually have about 5 hours of English development that they go through in an entire year. That's it, in order to make their English ability grow. And that's just not enough, right, for most teachers in the elementary school context, especially. So, we have these teachers that feel that their authority is declining, partly due to, this sort of growing criticism in the media and within society at large, according to Fujita, right? But on the other hand, we see that actually, if we give these daily experiences of autonomy to teachers, they actually become happier and, have a higher degree of vitality. So we should actually be focusing on the teachers, because in turn, that would translate through to the students as well. Happy teachers make happy students, and we all know that. So this is kind of I like this quote, Plutarch, the ancient Greek philosopher, but he said, the mind is not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be kindled, right? And interestingly, right, we cannot, if your fire cannot be kindled by a teacher whose flame is basically summarily extinguished. So we do need to focus on the teachers in order to focus on the students, right? Focusing on teachers is student-centered education, right? By focusing on these teachers. So we need to go through and we need to help teachers develop their resiliency, right? Because they are part of that shared classroom. And we need to provide these good role models for our students, gritty, non-native English-speaking teachers, where students look at these teachers and say, you know what, I think I can be like my teacher. I think I can be like him or her. And ALT's native speakers don't always provide that great model for students, because students think, I'm never going to be like a native speaker, but I might be like my non-native English speaking teacher. So we need to provide these realistic models for our students in the classroom. This is a great quote by Williams, Mercer, and Ryan, who said that, sense of self and beliefs and agency and goals are not solely our own, but are co-constructed and mediated by our relationships with others and with the groups to which we belong, right? So that's just, again, focusing on the shared classroom environment. We're all in it together. So if we focus on everybody in that shared environment, then we all win. Turning now very briefly to training considerations. We have 3 levels of training in Japan: national level training. This is the cascade training that I mentioned earlier, with the development of 1,000 core core leaders within Japan. We have prefectural level training, which happens every 10 years. And then we have municipal level, which often happens in individual schools through workshops and lesson observations. One of the questions that we do need to ask here is maintaining teacher quality simply a matter of controlling individuals and measuring and collecting data, or is there another way of approaching and enhancing teacher training, right? On the surface, this sort of detailed training system of workshops and tests and checks and observations, it's really well organized. It's rather effective in disseminating new instructional techniques and ed tech know-how to teachers throughout the nation. But the issue is the almost complete lack of attention to long-term well-being and self-efficacy of teachers, right? One of the biggest oversights actually is the fact that a lot of elementary school teachers are asked to do out-of-field teaching, which is where teachers are made to instruct a subject for which they were not trained. So right now, elementary school teachers, we're not actually trained to teach English, but they're being asked to do just that. So now, although the Cascade training is attempting to bridge that gap, it can't hope to reach everybody in time. Okay. So some suggestions for training are job crafting and strategies for enhancing autonomy in the classroom, mindset training, work-life balance focus. One of the things that I've proposed in other papers is short-term intensive study abroad opportunities, where we take teachers and we send them abroad in the summer for a week or 2 weeks to go to foreign universities to do intensive training in English. This really serves to motivate them and get them understanding about cultural awareness as well. We can do this by making adjustments to the ALT budget, and I think that's really important as well. There are other suggestions like reducing extracurricular burdens, and then we did talk about creating those labor laws, equitable labor laws, and then giving teachers more opportunities for autonomy in matters of policy and materials development. Okay, so we'll move on here and just finish up in just a moment. A good quote here: most governments are not consulting teachers and their unions when it comes to educational policy and funding, and on the contrary are imposing mandates which undermine the creative and innovative force of the profession, and accountability can never run in one direction. And this is very, very true. Now, teachers really have a very high intrinsic sense of duty, and this can cover the deficits in the short term, but it can't really help to prevent the long-term damage to the well-being of educators, in the future. So in MEC's pursuit to be accountable to students, they've sort of neglected to look at the long-term well-being of their teachers. So they need to look at that shared classroom experience and understand that focusing on teachers also focuses on their students. Okay. So we do have some challenges here, teacher well-being being one of them. Currently, Monbuka Gakusho is focusing on concrete aims only, measurable concrete aims. Have you achieved ACAN, EQ? How much English teacher training have you done? This does put a rather unfair burden on teachers because they're dealing with that constant stream of admin, supervision, PTA, prep, and they just, they're ripe for burnout currently. So rather than being a role model for their students, teachers end up passing on their language-related anxieties to their students. And we really don't want to encourage that vicious cycle. So we need to look at teacher training and put the focus back on teachers so that they are able to more adequately deal with the demands of the classroom and those of their students. Okay, so that's all I've got for you today. I thank you very much. I'm going to stop right there. I know I'm almost out of time. So I guess we have a few questions. Where are we here? Okay, sorry, I know you've got that in there. So some of the questions that are in the chat here, it looks like, do those numbers include home grading and other admin?
That was in relation to when you told us how many hours they were working each week. And I was wondering if that was just how much they were spending in the school, because, as teachers, we take grading home with us as well, or we do it on the train or whatever. I wonder if those things were factored into it.
Yes, as a matter of fact, those numbers are factored into it. So it is sort of the amount of hours that teachers are putting in at the school, but also outside of school in their homes. Yeah. And then the lowest in terms % of normal or actual money.
That was related to the salary when you were saying that they're overtime. So some places might pay you double the normal rate if you were doing overtime on a Saturday, for example. So were you meaning lowest in terms of rates or lowest in terms of the actual amount of money?
The actual amount of money. Yeah.
Well, for a developed country, that's quite shocking. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I was really shocked when I found that. So that is very concerning. So and there's not a lot of impetus to change the laws, as a matter of fact, which is a shame as well.
One quick thing before I pass it on to everyone else. I mean, I used to be involved with doing a lot of Google things, and they run these GAFs, Google Apps for Education training seminars around the world. And Japan is the only place where they've ever had to cancel one for lack of sign-ups, because A, most of the teachers didn't have the language skills to do it in English, and B, the schools wouldn't pay for it. So teachers would have to self-fund. And if they were self-funding, they didn't want to do it for something that they wouldn't get permission to use in the classroom anyway. So that kind of sums it up in a nutshell. And we've still got a couple of minutes left if anyone else has got any other questions. I found that really interesting. I'm sure others must have something to ask.
Any questions out there, guys? It is a Sunday, I realize.
Not so much a question as a comment. I agree. You mentioned one of your proposals was to send teachers abroad.
Yep.
And I always thought that a better investment of time and money would be to bring less 20-year-old teachers to Japan and send more 50-year teachers who are losing motivation abroad to get some practical experience.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more. Couldn't agree with you more. I think, yeah, in one of the papers I wrote previously, I proposed actually cutting the total number of JETs, ALTs in Japan, and then using that surplus in the budget in order to take non-native English speaking teachers and send them abroad so that they can develop a little bit of that motivation, cultural awareness, and you know, the feeling of self-efficacy to really promote you know, the language in their classrooms. I've outlined that in detail in previous presentations, but I still sort of stand by that. Yeah, I think that's an excellent.
Chris, one last thing. Your slideshow's got a lot of really good detail and numbers in there. Did you upload it onto the presenter's resource section on Eventzilla?
I did not yet. I wasn't aware.
That's an option for you if you want to do that. There should be a button there, or you might be able to contact Gary Ross to get it. But there is a presenter's resource section on Eventzilla where you are able to upload videos or links to documents or whatever. And just because yours did have a lot of interesting stats there, it might be something that you want to do as well. Anyway, we're a little bit over time. Thanks very much. I really enjoyed that. So a big round of applause there for Chris, everyone.
Thank you very much.
I'm just going to stop the recording now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.